Hey, tonight's story comes from a little creek town in eastern North Carolina, a place built on crossings, ferries, railroads, drawbridges, and stories passed down between swamp water for generations. Most people know it today for the Shad Festival, for small town parades, and the famous slogan, Eat Mo Shad. But long before the festival, long before the modern bridge, and long before the railroad tracks crossed the swamp, this place had other names: Bell's Ferry, Coward's Bridge, even a strange nickname, Skinhead. And according to local history, there's a reason people remembered this place this way. Because for more than 200 years, tragedy seemed to follow the crossing along Contentnea Creek. And for some old timers, they called it Moccasin Creek or Moccasin River. But floods, bridge collapses, railroad deaths, drownings, and industrial accidents followed along the Contentnea Creek. In 1974, the old Grifton Drawbridge claimed two more lives before disappearing forever. Now, officially, it was a tragic construction accident, but around eastern North Carolina, people still whisper about that bridge, about the river, about strange sounds near the crossing at night. And some people believe certain places remember the people that died there. Water remembers. So tonight, pull your chair a little closer because the story of Grifton, the bridge, and the creek that never forgot. Welcome to Campfire Stories with Sasquatch, stories from TicBite Swamp and beyond. In the shadows of eastern North Carolina, where blackwater swamps breathe fog across the lowlands, and the old creek crossings still whisper with memory, there's a town most people pass right by without ever realizing what lies beneath: Grifton, North Carolina. Today it's known for the Shad Festival, for small town hospitality, and for the famous slogan, Eat Mo Shad. But before Grifton was Grifton, it was Bell's Ferry. And before that, it was Peter's Ferry. And before that, it was more of a dangerous crossing on the banks of the Contentnea Creek, or as some old timers still call it, Moccasin River. If local legends are true, that creek remembers everything. Tonight's story starts back in the 1700s, long before highways, before electricity, before railroads cut across the swamps of eastern North Carolina. Back then, this place was known only by its crossings: ferries, wooden bridges, muddy roads that disappeared into cypress shallows. The creek separated counties, cultures, and sometimes even the law itself. For generations, travelers crossed the creek at dangerous points with names that sound almost forgotten today: Peter's Ferry, Blunt's Ferry, Coward's Bridge, Bell's Ferry. According to local records, even back then, the crossing had a reputation: floods, accidents, collapsed bridges, and drownings. By the late 1800s, locals began calling the area Skinhead, not because of anything modern, but because there were so many deadly accidents and tragedies tied to the crossing and the surrounding settlement. And honestly, that's where the story really gets strange. During the Civil War, Coward's Bridge was intentionally destroyed to slow advancing Union troops. Old timers later claimed that you could still see the timber pilings in the creek at low water. Some even claimed strange sounds could be heard near the crossing at night. Sounds like hammering, chains, voices. But that's just folklore, right? Right? Or maybe not. Because this town kept rebuilding crossings. Every generation, every era, bridge after bridge. It's almost like the creek demanded a price. In 1903, the entire town flooded. It flooded again in 99 and again in 2006, I think it was. But in 1903, it wasn't just a bad storm. It wasn't just high water. Records say people became sick, conditions became very unhealthy, and the townspeople eventually decided to move the town itself away from the creek bank. Think about that, an entire community relocating because the creek kept taking from them. And still the crossings continued. Ferries, railroads, and finally a drawbridge. In 1949, Grifton Drawbridge became the main symbol of the town. And sometime in 1974, somebody spray painted 4 simple words across that bridge: Eat Mo Shad. Nobody knew it then, but that graffiti would become immortal. The slogan survived, the bridge did not. Because later that year, the bridge became the site of one of the most horrifying accidents in local memory. According to newspaper records in 1974, workers were dismantling the old drawbridge when disaster struck. Men were cutting steel from the bridge, a bridge balanced by a massive counterweight system. And suddenly, the structure snapped upright, violently, without warning. 2 workers, Alton Bryant Lewis and Melvin Ray Heath, were catapulted into the air and killed. Another worker fell into the water below, but he survived. The newspaper described it plainly, cold, and kind of matter of fact. But if you talk to the people around Grifton and TicBite, that's not how they remember it. They remember the sound, the shock, the feeling that old bridge, that same crossing tied to generations of tragedy, had claimed 2 more lives before it disappeared. Now here's where the story gets even stranger. Because the area around the old crossing already carried decades of local tragedy, not far from the bridge, 2 men died at a railroad crossing after a train struck their truck. Another driver drowned upside down in a shallow creek after losing control. I still remember all 4 tires sticking out of the water. I saw it. Industrial accidents haunted the river corridor for generations. And over time, stories began to spread. Some locals claim strange noises could be heard near the crossing at night: metal clanking, voices over the water, the sound of something heavy shifting. Others claim the fog near the creek sometimes moves unnaturally, even when the air's still. And then there's the old belief, whispered by longtime locals, that the crossing around Contentnea Creek was cursed. Now, before I go full paranormal here, there's some pretty rational explanations for most of this. Creek crossings are dangerous places. Historically, they attract accidents, flooding, industrial accidents, rail traffic, heavy machinery, poor visibility, and dense fog. Human beings naturally attach these stories and meaning to places where repeated tragedy occurs. That's how folklore is born. But still, there's something eerie about the fact that nearly every generation around Grifton seems to have its own bridge or crossing story, its own memory tied to the creek. And maybe that's the real story here. Not ghost, not curses, memory. Because even now, the old bridge is gone. The ferries are gone. The railroad's changed. The crossing has evolved. Every spring, the shad still run up the Noosh River into Contentnea Creek, past the place where Bell's Ferry once stood. And every year, people gather again in Grifton beneath the slogan born on the bridge: Eat Mo Shad. A joke that outlived the bridge itself. A memory painted onto steel that somehow survived everything else. And if you stand near the creek late enough, when the fog rolls low across the Moccasin River. You might just understand why old Eastern North Carolina stories never really die. Because around TicBite, the past still walks beside the water. Now, maybe there's nothing paranormal about Grifton at all. Maybe the stories surrounding the old crossings are simply what happens when generations of tragedy, memory, and folklore become tied to the same stretch of creek. That's probably the logical explanation, because creeks are dangerous places. Bridges fail, floods happen, railroad crossings take lives, fog and darkness play tricks on the human mind. But human beings are naturally attached to stories and places. But still, there's something about old creek towns in eastern North Carolina that feel very different after dark. Maybe it's the fog rolling low across the creek. Maybe it's the sound of the water beneath the bridge. Maybe it's knowing how many people crossed before us and how many never made it back. The old drawbridge is gone. The ferry crossings disappeared long ago. But every spring, the shads still run up the river through Grifton, like they always have. And every year, people gather beneath a slogan painted on a bridge that no longer exists: Eat Mo Shad, a joke that somehow outlived the bridge itself. Thank y'all for listening to Campfire Stories with Sasquatch, stories from TicBite Swamp and beyond. If you enjoyed tonight's story, make sure to like, follow, subscribe, share the episode wherever you found it. The best way you can support the channel is to share the story with someone who likes old-time storytelling. If you'd like to support the channel financially, I'll put my links in the description. Every little bit helps. And if you're watching this on Facebook, you can subscribe on Facebook for a $12 a year subscription. That helps pay the bills. Creating free content is very expensive. Every little bit helps. Every little bit helps us continue documenting the forgotten history, folklore, mysteries, and legends of Eastern North Carolina. Until next time, this Sasquatch.
You go, dude.